This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Mr. Morrison, through you, Madam Chair, I am absolutely astounded and frankly disturbed by your testimony and your singular refusal to accept responsibility as the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister on what amounts to a colossal breakdown, to put it charitably. You cited page 27 of Mr. Johnson's report, in which an IMU noting that MP Chong had been targeted by Beijing, having been sent to the Minister of Public Safety, except for the fact that the Minister of Public Safety didn't receive that IMU, nor did his deputy minister, nor did his chief of staff. And in fact, Mr. Johnson, at page 28 of his report, which I hope you bothered to read, characterized it as the most prominent example of poor information flow. You said in your testimony that the system functioned properly. How can you say that in the face of that?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I did have some caveats to how I described how the system functioned. I also pointed out that it was an information memo, not an action memo, and that with 2020 hindsight, I think folks probably wish that it had reached the relevant minister. The larger point that I was making is that something disturbing came to light, and the relevant authorities in our system took action as they deemed best.
That isn't so. In fact, the IMU went into a black hole, and it appears that the July 2021 CSIS memo went into a black hole as well. You claimed, again, that the system functioned well. If that is the case, then why was MP Michael Chong not informed that his family was being targeted by Beijing?
Madam Chair, I would suggest that question be put to the Director of CSIS, who will be here
for that
tonight.
You said, Mr. Okay.
Chair, I believe that the CSIS Act required the Director of CSIS only to respond with unclassified information.
The notion that you would characterize this as not as merely information, background information, is really, again, astounding. I mean, we're talking about a memo that specifically indicates that a member of Parliament and his family are being targeted by Beijing, and you felt, and I think you're the first witness to come before this committee who has said essentially that in the face of that information, that alarming information, that wouldn't be information that would be acted upon. I find that just astonishing, Mr. Morrison.
The member is confusing two different pieces of paper. The IMU note that arrived or that was issued in May was acted upon. I characterized as for information and awareness raising the July 2021 memo, which was published afterward.
The July 2021 memo spoke about Parliament being targeted by Beijing because of his support for a motion declaring that the treatment by Beijing of the Uyghurs is tantamount to a genocide, and it further stated that Beijing's intelligence service, the Ministry of State Security, has, quote, taken specific actions to target Canadian MPs. And you think that that's information that should be just passed along in your reading materials, and that you wouldn't bother upon that coming across your desk to see that the Member of Parliament has been informed, to see that the Minister is aware, to see that that had been brought up to the Prime Minister? Really?
Madam Chair, if we go back to my introductory statement, I think it's important to note that I tried to suggest that long intelligence assessments, and according to the Globe and Mail, this assessment was 9 pages long and mentioned a great number of areas in which China may be trying to interfere in Canada's democracy. I made a second, and Jody Thomas characterized such assessments as, I forget her exact term, but nice to read, not necessary to read instantly or something like that. The larger point is such an assessment is designed to raise awareness within the community. I was also clear in making a second point that readers of such assessments, which do not include names and which did not include Michael Chong's name, can safely assume that if it shows up in a periodic assessment, the relevant actions have been taken. I made the distinction between something that appears on the front page as a breaking news story and something that appears in a deep dive. The July 2021 assessment report was a deep dive, and I stand by my comment that it was not intended to, in its own preface, spur any action, and that is made clear by the Globe and Mail reporting on it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Morrison, you say it's not abnormal for foreign states to be commenting on Canadian citizens. Well, in this particular case, we have evidence in a memo of a diplomat threatening a sitting member of Parliament because of him doing his job, of speaking on behalf of his constituents, and threatening to sanction his family. So for you to suggest or dismiss it as just a foreign state talking about someone in some way that shouldn't have raised alarm bells is completely unacceptable and really undermines your credibility. And you said that the system functioned properly. I want to go back to that point. The system functioned properly even though a sitting member of Parliament, Mr. Chong, was not briefed. The system functioned properly even though that information that you sat on resulted in a Beijing diplomat to be able to stay in Canada for 2 more years to harass and intimidate Chinese Canadians. But you say, sir, through you, Madam Chair, that is a case of the system working properly. And, Mr. Morrison, through you, Madam Chair, because you sat on that memo, that was a memo containing information that resulted in the expulsion of a diplomat, Mr. Zhao Wei. So do you support the decision to expel Mr. Zhao Wei?
Madam Chair, thanks for the question. Just to be clear, I never said the system functioned properly. That's what you did say. I said the system functioned. I read my remarks. I've just gone back and reread them, so maybe the transcript will show. I said I would submit that the system did function according to the protocols that were in place back in 2021. That's what I believe.
I asked you a question. I asked you a question, Mr. Morrison. Do you support the expulsion of Mr. Zhao Wei, which is based on information that you sat on for and allowed him to stay here for 2 years? Yes or no?
I was the person directly involved in the expulsion of Zhao Wei. So yes, I definitely support that expulsion. I would say, though, that there are, I can't go into all of the details, but there is information that has circulated in the media and elsewhere about Mr. Zhao Wei that is not accurate. I would say, though, that he did engage in activities...
Mr. Morrison, you answered my question. Now, you poo-poo and downplay the significance of the information that was before your desk as the Prime Minister's National Security and Intelligence Advisor on the basis that it was buried in a memo, and therefore somehow that shouldn't have captured your attention. We're talking about a 9-page memo. It's hardly a book, Mr. Morrison, and you're the national security advisor to the Prime Minister. Do you not take responsibility?
Madam Chair, I think I've asked, the question's been asked. I think I've tried to answer it a number of times. I can try again to say, number one, the memo did not name Michael Chong. It was a memo designed to raise
A
awareness.
sitting member of Parliament.
Pause.
It named a
Pause.
member of...
Mr. Cooper? Deputy, I'm going to say to you that there was a series of comments that were made within that exchange. And I have to appreciate your attempts to try to answer and not be given the floor. This institution that we're creating, that we're trying to improve, is not one that always functions well. The way people interpret comments and the way they're repeated often don't match the way they're delivered. So your opening comments will be part of our binder. Members will be able to review them. But I can assure you and reassure you that what members, some more than others, want to take from them, they will. And with that, for me, when it comes to this issue, it's very important. The minute there was a good exchange, a good hour, I rewarded good behavior. I commended it. I appreciated it. And I try not to interrupt, but right now I am taking some time here to interrupt because members need to understand that this chair will take time when we're not taking turns and allowing everyone to satisfy the role. That's how simple it is. And so I am going to give the floor back to Mr. Cooper. But Deputy, rest assured, I will be providing you some time to answer if you'd like it, because you being here to provide us information is important. And I'm also taking some comments, so I want to actually make some comments today too, because we need to understand how our institutions work. And oftentimes people who are on the elected side who have not had the exchanges, we don't really understand where there is overlap and how it works. So what you know and what we know doesn't always match, and this is our opportunity to better understand what you know. So thank you for that. I hope everyone got to take a nice little breath. Mr. Cooper.
Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Morrison, as the Prime Minister's National Security and Intelligence Advisor, do you take any responsibility for this failure? Any responsibility? Yes or no?
I'm sorry, take any responsibility. I missed the word for.
For this failure. The fact that you had this evidence, this information on your desk in August of 2021 and you did nothing. Do you take any responsibility for that?
Madam Chair, I challenge the premise of the question. I did read the report. I'm sure that in the course of my role as acting NSIA and as Foreign and Defense Policy Advisor, it informed how I advised the Prime Minister. And I did commission a follow-on piece into the subject area. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me just say in conclusion that it seems that people fail upward in this government as long as they remain loyal to the Prime Minister. Isn't that right, Mr. Morrison?
With that, we are at time. So, Mr. Cooper, I do not anticipate hearing your voice until it's your turn again or whoever's. Mr. Deputy Morrison, the floor is yours.
I have nothing to say to the fail upward comment.
Appreciated.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, thank you, Mr. Morrison, for joining us here today. I want to follow up on some comments and some dates that have been thrown out. I want to confirm that you received the 9-page memo in your reading package on August 17th, 2021, and that reading package was prepared for you by a PCO official. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that 2 days prior to that, August 15th, the Prime Minister dissolved Parliament, triggering an election. Were you aware of that fact at the time of August 17th?
I was aware that an election had been called.
You, as National Security and Intelligence Advisor, were a member of the panel of 5, the Critical Election Incident Public Protocol. Am I correct in that?
Yes, you are.
So the fact that a PCO official provided you on August 17th, 2 days into a writ period, with a memo indicating that parliamentarians were being targeted by a foreign regime, you as National Security and Intelligence Advisor, you as a member of the panel of 5, didn't twig to the fact that this could be an issue in a campaign that had just been called 2 days prior?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Let me begin by saying that my participation in the panel of 5 and my awareness of the role that panel plays during our elections began when I was named acting National Security Advisor on the 1st of July. There were, I recall, I think several meetings of the panel of 5 and briefings of the panel of 5 and scenario playings of the panel of 5 in the run-up to a widely anticipated election. My clear expectation was that if there was any real and imminent threat to Canada's democracy, the SITE task force would make that part of their regular briefings and, in fact, part of their daily written briefings to the panel of 5. So the answer to the question is no. I did not anticipate being informed of a threat to Canada's democratic processes in a lengthy info note that came without warning in my pack.
With the greatest of respect, sir, you were informed. You were informed on August 17th, 2 days in the writ period. You, as National Security and Intelligence Advisor, you, as a member of a panel of 5, were informed of foreign activities targeting Canadian citizens, targeting Canadian parliamentarians. You were informed, sir. You can't say that because you weren't informed in the capacity of the CEIPP, you were informed as the National Security Intelligence Advisor. That's the fact that's troubling to me, is that 2 days in the writ period, PCO saw fit to provide you with a 9-page memo on foreign interference in Canadian elections, and you did not twig to that fact or deal with it through the through the Critical Election Incident Protocol. I find that simply astonishing that someone in your position, you say you're not a career public servant, but sir, you've been in the most senior ranks of government for over a decade. So you can't hide behind the fact that you're not a career public servant. And frankly, listening to the testimony today, I fear that you've watched Yes Minister and taken that as a training guide rather than as a comedy. I'm reminded of Sir Humphrey Appleby, who said clarification isn't meant to provide clarity, it's meant to put oneself in the clear. And that is what we're seeing here. You mentioned that there was a follow-up piece, that you asked for a follow-up piece. On what date did you ask for that follow-up piece?
May I begin, Madam Chair, by stating explicitly that my opening remarks were in fact intended to provide clarity to an issue that has bedeviled many people, understandably, because it's a complex issue. I said explicitly, I think there are 2 areas of misunderstanding on the July 2021 memo, and I did my best to try to inject some clarity into that. The answer to the question is I don't recall the exact date that I asked for the follow-up memo.
So I would ask then, could you come back to this committee and provide the date on which you asked for the follow-up memo and the date that you received follow-up memo, and if you could share that memo with this committee?
If I could answer, Madam Chair, I'm sure the follow-up memo is top secret and therefore unable to be shared with the committee. I'm told that I saw a draft in December of 2021 and that the memo was finalized in January of 2022. For the record, most of it has already been published by Global.
Mr. Morrison, in answer to the last question posed by Mr. Nader, you said that with respect to the follow-up to the July 2021 CSIS memo, that you saw a draft in December of 2021, and that draft was finalized in January of 2022. And when Mr. Nader asked you to provide a copy of that to the committee, you said that you would be unable to, but that much of its contents had been reported in Global News. And for the record, Madam Chair, I would like to note that Global News did, in fact, on March 8th, report a January 2022 special report that was prepared by PCO, which was date-stamped and finalized, suggesting that it was intended to be read by the Prime Minister and his senior aides. That memo or special report contained, among other things, that, quote, a large clandestine transfer of funds earmarked for the federal election from the PRC consulate in Toronto was transferred to an elected provincial government official via a staff member of a 2019 federal candidate. That, quote, we assess that Canada remains highly vulnerable to Chinese foreign interference efforts. We base this judgment on intelligence that highlights deep and persistent Chinese Communist Party interference attempts over more than a decade, and that the group allegedly involved at least 11 candidates and 13 or more aides. In short, Mr. Morrison, you have conceded what the Prime Minister and this government have repeatedly denied and attempted to cover up. Did that PCO memo, that January 2022 special report, come to the attention of the Prime Minister?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I left PCO on or about the 5th or 6th of January of 2022, so I don't believe I even saw the memo until very recently, so I can't answer whether it came to the attention of the Prime Minister. What I will say is that all such allegations of money transferring hands and direct influence in our democratic institutions by the People's Republic of China were investigated by the independent special rapporteur, and I would commend his report to anyone wishing further information.
Madam Chair, I think pretty incredible. You, changing gears, Mr. Morrison, through you, Madam Chair, when you last came before this committee, you said that there was no spike in foreign interference in either the 2019 or 2021 elections. And I'd ask you to explain how you can reconcile that assertion with the CSIS briefing that Aaron O'Toole received, wherein he was informed that in the 2021 election campaign, Beijing had launched an orchestrated campaign targeting him and the Conservative Party.
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I would respectfully suggest that questions about what CSIS did or did not brief to Mr. O'Toole be put directly to CSIS, and I know there'll be an opportunity to do so this evening. I was a member, as I think the committee knows, of the panel of 5 for the 2021 election. I've answered the question on this several times. We were not made aware of any spike in foreign interference during either the 2019 or the 2021 election, and that finding was validated by 2 separate after-action reports.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So do you not find it, Mr. O'Toole was briefed of foreign funding to create misinformation, human resources to amplify misinformation through proxies coordinated by the United Front Work Department, foreign-controlled social media platforms spreading disinformation, and an active voter suppression campaign against Mr. O'Toole and the Conservative Party. Are you suggesting that these activities are normal, that wouldn't constitute a spike in foreign interference by a hostile state such as Beijing?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. I would say that I am familiar with the account that has shown up in the media of what took place in that briefing. I'm also saying that what I've said before, there's a baseline level of foreign interference in Canada that did not spike in the 2021 election, and that finding has been validated by independent observers.
Thank you. Monsieur Berthold, suivi par Monsieur Fergus. Monsieur Berthold.
Thank you. Mr. Morrison, I've been listening since the beginning, and I've heard several witnesses since the beginning of these hearings on the Michael Chong file, and one thing that amazes me is that nobody has taken the responsibility for the information that was transmitted or that was distributed. You have spoken about these memo that spoke to foreign interference. You've confirmed practically the content of the memo revealed by Global News, saying that it was top secret, but that most of the content had been revealed in that article. Mr. Vincent Rigby, your predecessor, said that he had read 5,000 to 7,000 documents in 18 months, and he challenged me even to sit in the seat of the NSIA to see the importance of the work. But that's the problem. We have people such as yourselves, Mr. Rigby, we sit you down to look at this information. So who is connecting the dots? Who is referring what? Who is determining what happens? The way that I've been listening to you since the beginning. I've heard people who testified here. Everyone was informed, but nobody made a decision. When you see the word information, or do you not act because you think someone else is going to act in your stead? Mr. Morrison, this is concerning for Canadians, for the diaspora. It's concerning to know that people in jobs such as yourselves are not able to be the eyes of Canadian citizens who need people who are going to look at all these elements.
Merci, merci, Madame.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question.
Through the dates again, I've given you my opening statement, and I've said that I believe that the system in place functioned according to with respect to Mr. Chong, that the system in place functioned according to the relevant protocols at that time. You've asked a much bigger, or the honourable member has asked a much bigger question about what do you do when there is such a volume of intel reporting, and it's a good and thoughtful question. I used the word, in response to a previous question, I used the word triage. I do think we could be better at flagging up to the National Security Intelligence Advisor, flagging up to me when necessary, particularly relevant pieces of information within global affairs, where I've been for the past 7 or so months. We have tried to tighten up our own efforts to ensure that I know what I need to know, and to ensure that the Minister of Foreign Affairs knows what she needs to know.
Thank you, Mr. Morrison, and I listened to your opening statement, Mr. Morrison, but it's nonetheless concerning. You realize it now, but this was not done at the time. So how to make sure that people will not be responding the same thing? Here's an example, a specific example. The Globe and Mail on May the 12th had an article in which it said that CSIS provided to the government, to Global Affairs Canada, your department, a list of other Beijing diplomats that should be considered for expulsion given their activities with regards to interference. Was this note sent with a mention for your information only?
Merci beaucoup pour la question. Pour juste une petite clarification.
Thank you for the question. Here's a small clarification. For my own information, this was provided to Global Affairs, and you are in charge of Global Affairs Canada. And there was a list of other diplomats. Was this list sent to your department with a mention for information purposes only? And if so, who will now act on this list? Because it seems obvious that it will not be you, because nothing was done. Nothing is done when you receive these notes.
And encourage, Madam Chair, folks not to believe everything they read in the newspapers. My second point is that if I had the date of the Globe and Mail article correct that you just mentioned, that was the 12th of May. I would remind you, Madam Chair, that we did expel a Canadian diplomat on the 8th of May. And as a part of the normal way in which we do diplomacy and intelligence, we are always on the system is on the outlook for foreign interference, and when it happens, we'll take necessary actions.
Can you just reiterate for the committee and for people who are watching, how many times did David Johnston meet with you in regards to the report that he issued?
3 times.
Was that in person, over the phone? How did that happen?
On all 3 occasions, I went to a location in central Ottawa where this process, or from where this process was being conducted. It was in a secure facility. On one of those 3 occasions, I recall Mr. Johnston being on video. On the other 2, I believe he was there in person.
So you say it was only 3 times. I do believe there's information out there suggesting that you met with him 4 times, but I'm not going to get into...
I believe your question was when he was preparing the report. I've met with him an additional time after the report came out.
Thank you.
So a total of 4 times.
Total of 4 times. Thank you. Now you've said today before this committee, and you talked about the special report. In your conversations with David Johnston, because I don't see any reference in the Johnston report about the January 2022 special report. Did you disclose or have a conversation with Mr. Johnston about that special report?
To the best of my recollection, in all of my interactions with Mr. Johnston and his team, we were not dealing principally or even occasionally with individual pieces of intel. The first time I met Mr. Johnston was on Easter Monday in the afternoon, and it was really, I believe by that time, Mr. Johnston had introductory briefings by a range of federal public service colleagues. As Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. I'm responsible for something called the Rapid Response Mechanism. I was on the panel of 5, but I believe most of the introductory briefings came from the security and intelligence community. And I was interested, and he was interested, I think, in learning more about the difference between foreign interference and foreign influence.
And you needed to go to a remote secure location to have that general conversation? It seems to me that if you're going to a secure location to have a meeting, you would be talking about classified information. Am I missing something?
The setup, and I believe it was established by the Privy Council office, had a secure location and a top secret location, if I remember. I know I had to leave my phone outside and take off my smartwatch, and that is because such conversations can range over a wide variety of topics, and we therefore took appropriate protections.
You talked about your role on the panel of 5. The Johnson report actually doesn't even address the issues pertaining this memo and other information. He only actually addressed the panel of 5 as it pertains to the 2019 election. Is there a reason that Mr. Johnson would have not included those conversations or included any information from the panel of 5 in the 2021 election? It seems odd that it's missing from his report. You were a member of the panel of 5 in 2021, but not in 2019. Do I have that right?
You have that correct. I don't consider it curious at all that his report, well, let me just say the following. There were reports produced by Jim Judd and Maurice Rosenberg about the functioning of the panel in 2019 and 2021, and I would commend those to the committee.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
I do have one more follow-up.
Sorry, I have a point of order, Mr. Nader.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I will be exceptionally brief, but I don't want misinformation before the committee. And in a document table yesterday by Mr. Fergus, April 10th, April 12th, April 13th, and April 25th, 4 times before Mr. Johnson's report was tabled, Mr. Morrison met with Mr. Johnson according to the documents tabled by Mr. Fergus. So I just don't want misinformation to hang before the committee.
May I respond?
Sorry, I'm just going
Madam
to. I'm just.
My recollection, if I met 4 times with David Johnson before the publication of the report, I apologize. That was my recollection, and the record can be corrected accordingly. Thank you.
We appreciate that because I think there is a lot going on, but I think Mr. Nader's point is well received, and we appreciate the clarification, and that means the record does reflect accurately, and we'll make sure your comments match. I am going to, Mr. Calkins, just because the exchange was so peaceful and good, yes, one more question to you.
So I have in my hands an article from Global News by Marc-Andre Cossette, who says that through a statement issued by your department while you were, I believe, the Deputy Minister of Global Affairs, you said, Mr. Morrison does not recall having received any written material regarding threats to MPs during this time, according to a spokesperson for Global Affairs Canada, where Morrison now serves as Deputy Minister. He also does not recall any oral briefings or discussions on the issue while NSIA, the department said in its statement. Yet you've admitted today before this committee that you were not only functionally aware of threats to members of Parliament, even though you claim you didn't know their names, and you said that you are acutely aware and have even taken credit for initiating responses to the special report in December, originating in December and talked about in January of 2022. So how can you have a premeditated, vetted correspondence coming out of your department while you're the Deputy Minister that completely contradicts what you've said here today at this committee?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I believe the actual question had to do with targeting of MPs, and that's the question to which I responded. And I not only claimed not to know the names, I didn't know the names of any of the MPs that had been targeted until I read them in the press.